Hi, everyone. This is Stiglr, Alan Dickerson here for another episode of Stiglr for the Details. And today we are scheduled to have as our guest Russ Gifford, who is a curator of SPI Wargame resources, better known as spigames.net. But our guest of honor has not appeared yet. I'm hoping he will only be delayed for a few minutes and then we can get right into the interview. Um, Also, we'll see if anybody else jumps in here in the meantime. And then if we don't have our guest here, then we can just chat about anything, really. Um, this isn't scripted at all. So, I'm hoping to have a nice interview session with Russ. And if not that, then we can talk about everything and anything pertaining to war games. So for now, we just wait, and I will check Facebook, which is usually where I can find Russ hanging out, and we'll see if we can't get him into the studio. Ah, thanks for that, JK. I see your message there, and we will we will see. Actually, when I turned on Facebook maybe 20 minutes ago or a half an hour ago, I saw he had a green light there, so he was on. And then I guess maybe he's scrambling to find a cam or a mic or something like that. And yep, technical difficulties, they do happen. Ah, he just popped up in the studio, but devices are not connected. So we are making progress, and hopefully Russ will be all connected. Hi, John. How's it going? And I think Russ is almost here. Probably plugging in a couple of odds and sods. See what we get here. All right, we at least have a spinning wheel for Russ, so we are making some progress. Hi, Martin. How's it going?
Freeze up constantly. That'd be great.
I hear a voice. Is that you, Russ? Ah, there we are. The man himself.
Huh? Look at that.
All right. Well, I am going to go back and redo my.
Can't hear a word you're saying, Alan.
Oh, nobody can hear me? You can't hear me, Russ.
Why can't I hear you?
Yeah, I'm not hearing you. Well, I'm hearing you with a little bit of a delay, but hang on, let me check with the other people who are here. Just added a message to the text buffer, but you still cannot hear me?
Nothing.
Nothing.
This is Russ. I'm talking. If anybody else out there can hear me, please put a thumbs up. You can hear me fine.
Yes, I can
can't
hear
hear
you
you.
fine.
How interesting. I'm going to try something here. Hang on.
Okay.
Let's try that. Can you?
Yes, I can. Well,
I don't hear you, sir.
you still don't hear me. This is
Hmm.
interesting. Do you have
Let's see if
speakers
I've
set
got
up?
a little note here. Says that I'm connected. Cool. I'm not sure where I would see. I have having issues. Let's try that. So I'm assuming there's other people out there that can hear us and see us.
Yes,
If you'd
yes, I'm
like to
getting
use the chat on the
messages.
side, that would be good. I could at least answer a question if you can hear me. All right.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, everyone can hear you. I think. Well, do you have speakers on your PC
Not
that
a
you
thing.
normally use?
Okay. Hmm. All right. So you can hear both. I don't hear anything. I show that I've got my mic all the way up. I'm gonna check. So just in case, can you still hear me, Alan?
Yes, I can.
You can. Hmm.
Yes.
Why in the world can I not hear you? I'm going to cam mic. Host has unmuted your mic, so you tried to mute it and unmute it. Okay.
Yeah.
I still don't hear you.
Oh no, this is not
I'm
going to be
going to
good.
mute my mic and unmute it. Brought it back. It's up. Why would I not hear audio? Normally, for the rest of my classes, I do. So, I do not see a mute button anywhere.
It would be speakers. It would be your speakers.
Right. Go ahead and speak if you would, Alan, just to see.
Yep, I'm here, waiting for you to hear anything I say.
If I come over here and bring up my speaker headphone, it says that it's up. I have nothing plugged into the jack. I am sorry, everybody, about these technical difficulties. I guess I. Well, I happen to have a set of headphones. Just a second, I can try it. Never had to before, but let's give it a shot.
Technology, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And now can you hear us?
All right, now I'm getting my normal studio sound. I just had something come in and
Yeah.
it's getting there, but I'm not hearing anything through SteamYard. Alan, could you say something for me?
Yes. Yes, I'm speaking.
No, not hearing a thing.
Oh no, this is not good. I wonder what's going on. I am
Okay.
not muted and unmute. That should be fine. Hmm.
All right. I'm not sure if I'm aware of anything else that I can check here. Um,
Yeah, well,
Now,
if
I
you've
will
got,
say that it's asking if I want to log in, but down here it's saying everyone can see and hear me. This would be an interesting way to do a show. We could have the questions come in over private chat or excuse me, through the live comments, and I could speak if you folks can hear me okay, I guess that's okay with me. Alan, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Just have to chat.
I'm typing.
All right. Okay. So, um, Alan, could you start off with the first question that you know, have just been dying to ask me for years? I just know it. I'm positive of it. I know you have one. Like, Russ, why don't you have your computer working right, or something like that, you know? All right. Well, I I actually started, and I'm just curious if we share a screen, can I show you pictures of things? Is that possible? If I hit share screen, can I show what's on mine? I'm going to give it a try just for the heck of it, because, you know, like what else you got to do, right? So I'm going to bring that up in the background. Do you have the ability to share the screen, or do I have to do that? I'm going to try it here if you're ready. All right, sharing screen, two monitors. Well, sure, it'd work good with two monitors. This could be dangerous. If I don't come back, we'll know that it's there somewhere. Hang on just a second, and we'll see what we got here. All right. So if you'd ask why I started this, the reality is I was working on the concept of having something. I'm going to try and pull this over. Can you see the SPI Wargames article index there on your screen? If you do, what you see on the side there, now it's asking which one I'd like to share. All right, let's try that. That's not the one. This one. Okay. Well, you can see the SPI Wargames article index. I was working on that because I had the concept that you've got all these moves magazines and all these wonderful SPI S&T articles that are great for games. And anybody that knows me knows that from my point of view, gaming means playing. And I like to find people. I like to be able to sit across the board from them or play by email. I played a lot of games by mail and email over the years. But the one thing that drove me nuts was you wanted to know what the errata was, or you wanted to know these other items. And plus, there's just a ton of great articles about these games, and there was nothing for it. And I've found that you can have a great time leafing through the magazines, but in reality, um, you're just leafing through. If you really wanted to use them, if you really wanted to understand them, it'd be nice if you had the ability to find more information. So what I did to start with was I'd created a database of all the games, and I could say, well, okay, I want to look up a specific game, but then I tied that database into my actual uh, setup for articles. So if I wanted to find anything, you know, it's just a matter of typing a few letters, and uh, you know, I could then pull up the game, and it would tell me all about the game. My computer's running a little slow tonight, and I'm sorry about that. But it would actually show me the basic information I was looking for, and of course, this could have a lot more. Most of this game info came all uh, straight from the concept of the catalogs. I used those to start with, and then I added into it. And I tried to put the formats in because I don't know about you, but I like to see the formats. And then I started linking any other things I had. And I said, you know, this just isn't enough. I have to move this a bit so I can see my buttons. I said, maybe I'd like to see all the articles. And I could just click a button then, and it would actually show me all the articles in a list, or I could click a button and see all the photos that I had of that game. And I said, this is all really nice, and I enjoy having all of this at my fingertips, but I'd like to have other people have this. Now, what I started with, to be honest, was I kept trying to interest Decision Games in the concept that I've got all of these other um, game articles for their magazine, since they bought the rights to it. I've got all of those pulled together, and just by putting in a few letters, you could find out anything you wanted about these. Um, and by the same token, then I would start to do the same thing just to find any articles about a game or about any other items for it. And by doing that, I'm not sure what there is for Bloody April, actually. Um, I could say, well, let's just see all the articles and then know a little bit about them. And I just slowly added all the games and the articles in. And then I also made it that I could browse to the issue and see it. But maybe that wasn't the article I wanted. Maybe I wanted this. And one of the big things I did was I put all of the designer notes. I broke it down so that I could find every game in the works in progress, because I used to love reading those and seeing how that works. So, with all that, then I could also see the authors and everything else. Um, and in this case, Bloody April, I've got 29 listings. I could see any of them, and I could immediately go to it, or I could look at them. If I didn't like going that way, I don't know if this will actually work on this screen, but we'll try it. All right. I'm just going to cancel out of that for right now. But you'd be able to either get a report or a screen. And I just kept adding things to it, which included any reports that were in this or the game collection, so that you could go and look up your games and decide who had what with what. Now you may say, what's that have to do with the website, Russ? We ask about the website. Well, I could never get as you like to call them, derision games. Um, I could never, ever get them to even talk to me at that time. Now, part of that was I was using the word computer, and they had a 25-year agreement with somebody that anything that had to do with computers, that person got it. So, with that, it was they just didn't want to talk to you. And I had people that actually walked it in for me, and I could not get them to talk to me. So that makes it a little hard. So with that, I decided it was Christmas Eve, and I was home, and I decided, you know what? Let them sue me. I'm just going to start putting all of this online. I could break it down, since I had this database already that would tell me where everything was. I could break it down and say, I don't care. I can actually do this. So, with that, in creating that, it allowed me uh, to create the website. Now, I'll be honest, uh, it took them a while, but they did come to talk to me about some of that. Ooh, that's a neat effect. I like that effect, but I think we should go to something else. So, with all of that, then I would go ahead and create other items. Oh, you're seeing my Wargame collection. But I actually, let's stop sharing for a second. But I actually would be able to provide everything that was in the database, but live online. One of the reasons it's not exactly a clean setup is because people would come in and report it, and I'd have to discuss with them being DG, things they wanted me to remove, and things like that. That's also why there's nothing for S&T articles. I mean, it'd be very nice to put all those up there. It did finally move them. I had wanted to provide, and I would have done it at a dime a copy. I wanted to provide that entire data sheet that you saw, not sheet, the entire database. I was willing to give that to them at something like a dime to 50 cents a copy, to say you should at least have these S&Ts out there. You should have all these moves, because you could pull up each issue with that. I showed you that browse button. I originally had it, you could go directly to the article, but I changed it to where you could at least go straight to each magazine. And I was willing to all but give that to them, and I couldn't even get them to talk to me. So with that, I did the website and use that to pull people in. Before that, I was just doing it for Great Battles of the American Civil War, and I just kept adding to it. So that's how the website got started, and that's why it may seem a little confusing, but it's a little easier than have them constantly jumping at me whenever they choose. So it's also why I don't like to bait them too much online, because they could make life miserable. So, all right, now I got something in my way over here. So if anybody's asking, what year did that start? I believe I put that up. I know I was still in New York. I'd come home for I frequently, they had told me I'd be home 1 week every 3 weeks. It got to the point where I was actually only home 3 weeks out of the year, if that. And generally, that was to do my classes at the college that I teach. I do one solid week of classes once each term, and then I'd come home at Christmas. And it was over Christmas then that I built the website. Now, Opponent Finder just grew out of the fact that, and you've heard me say it online, folks, it drove me crazy. Here I was going all over New England, and I would go into these game shops if I could find a game shop, and of course we don't have many anymore. And I'd post posters and signs and say, you could call me. Here's my email. I'll be in town, because I spent a week, and in many towns I spent multiple weeks. They just might not be consecutive, but I spent next to no time in New York. I 45 to 47 weeks out of the year, I was somewhere else, and I'd be there in a nice hotel room for at least a week, sometimes two, and in many cases like Erie, Buffalo, Portland, Maine, uh, Boston, I could end up being there anywhere from half a year to a year overall. So with that, I was tired of trying to pull people, and especially once we got going with this wonderful Facebook thing, I was able to uh, start building things and say I want to find opponents rather than do it the hard way. And I have to tell you, there's got to be, at least since I started this not quite 2 years ago, uh, there's at least 20 people out there that have found, that I've found, as somebody else that plays these games in their same town or within 10 minutes. And I think that's impressive, but it also just says why you have to advertise. And a lot of that just goes back. I've spent 30 to 40 years building gaming groups and connections, and that's really an outgrowth of SPI, because I had a situation. Um, I had a situation where I was playing face to face. It was the guy that I always played Terrible Swift Sword with, and we played a lot of games. Plus, we played a lot of City Fight. And he came over, and it was Mother's Day one year, and he came over. We played a game, and then he said, I just got a job. out of town. I'm going to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and I was like, and he left, and that was 1984. And I realized on Mother's Day of 1985, I had not played a single game since he had left, and I had resolved to change that. And I started with conventions. I started with articles. I just pinged things. Then, of course, came all the online stuff and kept doing that. So that's why I do it. Now, do they have them face to face or Vassal? As Alan knows, I have been a Neanderthal when it comes to Vassal, and I was present at the creation with it because I was kind of big in ASL, and we were doing all the online stuff, and they built it, and uh, and it's a wonderful invention. I have personal issues with it, but of course, he also knows I've been coming around, and some of you have played a game or two with me. And if it weren't for the job situation right now, I'd probably be playing a whole lot of games on Vassal. And I've certainly come to like the fact that on anything I'm developing for, where I need pictures to show a training session, that really works well. And uh, JK, thank you very much. So yeah, and actually, that was the start of it for VASL. That's what developed the engine that has since gone on to be known as VASSL. It all started out of that VASL. So, but I strongly encourage everyone to get into Vassal. I mean, it is the way. So you guys are hearing me all right? Is this working at least a little bit for you? All right, good.
We can
I
at
was
least
really
hear
looking
you.
forward to hearing all of you. So, and I'm leaning in too far, but hey, great life if you don't weaken, right? So, ah, so I think I may have missed a message up there or something, and yeah, so the big, it's true, Alan, you do. Uh, do the baiting for all of us. So, um, ah, next issue. Okay. So, um, other comments or thoughts. So, yeah, Vassal, this is good. So, anyway, um, let's see other points. You know, I I greatly enjoy all of you on the SPI games. I mean, talk about feeling like you have people out there after all these years of being this voice in the wilderness. And I used to always tell everybody that the way you build an online presence was you just make sure you show up every day to post something. When I first started with CompuServe, and then got in the fight with them and moved over to Genie, um, I would just go in every day. There was nothing happening. And I just go in every day and post a message on the boards that we had assigned to us. And it just builds. It just works. And I find it so funny because, of course, we look at Facebook and it seems so advanced and everything else. And it is so much nicer. But in reality, behind it all, it is just exactly what we had with uh, both with CompuServe and Genie. The difference was you paid a lot of money, as John just said there. Oh, you only paid $2.49 a minute. Some of us paid more because we're out here in the middle of nowhere, and there was the extra. So, all right.
All right. I'm gonna jump in here
So,
a little bit and
okay,
answer
I
one
see Alan
question.
has said Brightonfield. That's interesting. So, did you
Yeah.
get that in the S&T, Alan? You'll have to
Well,
nod your head to tell me. Yeah, all right, good man.
what
So,
what really happened was I was in high school when Brightonfeld came out, and I was a dyed-in-the-wool Avalon Hill guy. I just loved Avalon Hill, and I showed up at a new high school in Los Angeles, and we had a war game club, and I was still pretty new to the hobby, but I joined the war game club, and we would meet in this little building on the side of campus where the Jesuits would put us, where they thought they could control us a little bit. And I remember people bringing out all these SPI games with the paper maps, and I was just saying, "Oh, wait, they don't even mount the map boards. These can't be real war games," and all that. I was a total Avalon Hill person, and some of my friends just said, "Just try it, just try it." I had no idea what the 30 Years' War was about. I knew nothing about it, and I just tried it. And after watching the Saxons evaporate, I was kind of a convert, and I started to see that there really was something behind all these games. And within about a year, I had completely changed my stripes and had gone from being a Avalon Hill company man to totally SBI, and really haven't looked back since.
Hmm. Now, I cannot wait, and I hope I'm not cutting you off. It looked like you stopped. I cannot wait to watch the video of this so I can hear that whole story. I just want you to know that. So, Martin, you ask a question. It's probably a pretty good one, which is any plans for the web pages following my demise? Well, I will tell you that I know there's at least one person out there that has been mirroring my website throughout uh, as a just in case. So that is an expectation. Now, the reality is, I always pay multiple years in advance for all the web space I use. And of course, the more videos I get into and the more audio stuff I put in there, that has somewhat increased. And most of you probably also know that RussGifford.net has some of my presentations. I don't have a lot with audio, which is a frustrating thing for my history classes. But the reality is, you've got a year to pull everything down. After if something should happen to me. Uh, and there are a number of people on the SBI games also that know me personally, one of which will be, if he hears of my demise, will be here to clean out the games before anybody else can get there. And that is his deal. We've said that for quite a while. And Tom, that is you I'm talking about, yes. But the his problem is he's about 3 hours away, and my other buddy's only about an hour and a half away. So it's going to be tough. But they're figuring they can split up the books, and one will take the books, one will take the games. So yes. So there's that. By the way, the first S&T I saw was the one with it was 29. It was 29. So yeah. Yeah, skirmish on the site, and they better roll high, because if you have to retreat, it's going to be bad. So, but that is one thing I do actually like about the website stuff. It doesn't really go away, until you stop paying the bills long enough. So, and it's very ironic, because back in, I think, I was developing a lot of stuff, and then I first saw the thing for uh, uh, Mozilla, and that what would become the World Wide Web. We didn't have that terminology then. And I immediately stopped the thing I was building for one city and developed it into a website. And then on the side, I developed an ASL website, because at that time I was the uh, tournament director for Avalon Con for ASL. And just recently, just a few months ago, somebody uncovered copies in the Internet Archive of some of those early pages from the 90s that I'd built for that. So all good, all good. But huge collection we found at a garage sale. Okay, there you go. See, it's funny because I often talk about that with books. Now, do I consider myself a grognard? I don't think I complain enough. I think that's the thing about grognards, right? You got to be grumbly. I don't think I complain enough. So, and I'm gonna take the first swing at JK's question down here with the why do we think so many people care about SPI? Uh, yeah, it is almost 40 years. Wow. After its demise, and I'm going to tell you, um, the number one reason I think is because of the personality, power, and just um, total presence of Redmond Simonson. He spoke to you in every magazine, every issue, every time you were having a conversation with that man, and he treated you with respect, even though he'd probably heard so many stupid comments from every gamer that he'd ever had to deal with. But he those magazines, and it's the whole reason I started the database. It's the entire reason I started the website. I wanted those articles and his little missives at the start of each one. I wanted those to live on. I wanted that feeling to live on. um, I think that you don't have SPI if you don't have James Dunnigan. But I don't think SPI ever exists if James Dunnigan does not have Redmond Simonson. And that is a reality in my mind. And he developed so many people along the way. And I sometimes think of that because a lot of the things I read and a lot of the things they were trying to do about developing things, that's how I ended up developing my first convention. And out here in the middle of nowhere. I'm located, for those of you who don't know, you look at the map, you look just about dead center, a little north of that, where Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota come together. And by the way, your point about dropping over dead is possible because you might have noticed that's the spot that has been leading percentage wise the explosion in COVID for the last week. But never mind. Uh, the bottom line is out here in the middle of nowhere, I I ended up with a convention that had 300 gamers, and that whole point of that convention was to continue. It was 1985. It was due to that fact that I had not played anybody in a year. It was to keep playing SPI games, and that's why I did it. It only had probably less than 100 the first time, and I had friends that were, oh, well, what if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't? I'm like, so who cares? So if nobody shows up, who knows that it failed? Who would care? If you go ahead and don't worry about failure, you can do a lot of things. And the reality was, within 2 years, we had 300 plus people. And then I used a lot of those same things in helping what's affectionately known as DonCon uh, get going because Don Greenwood and I started conversations. So that's great. So if that answers the question as to what you ask, that's why I think. And I guess Alan, I'd like to know your thoughts. Why do you think it's so popular after 40 years? And again,
Well,
I'll take your answer offline.
oh, okay.
Keep going.
I'll fill in a little bit for everybody else who's listening in. Yeah, I agree with you. Redmond Simonson is just a total icon. I mean, I I guess it's hard to separate him and Dunnigan as far as influence on the company, but yeah, it's kind of like Lennon and McCartney for the Beatles. You can't do the thing without either one of them not being there. So they're kind of tied. But as far as his artwork goes, I'm always online and talking to people about the new type of artwork that we're seeing with a lot of really oversaturated um, artwork that I mean to me it just burns my retinas and just makes me pine for that understated quality that Redmond Simonson brought to 90% of his designs. He had a couple little stinkers here and there, but by and large, he put such a stamp on artwork for war games that no one has really come close to on a career level. Um, there are a few modern uh, art designers who can put together a really nice package occasionally, and they're really using the best of technology and what we can access today on our PCs. But still, you know, by and large, Redmond Simonson still beats 90% of anything that's going out there. So that's my opinion on it.
Okay. So was that a finish? Nod your head. Okay. Um, you say the latest SPI game played opposed, meaning that I sat down live with somebody or sat across a Vassal screen. Um, the I had played a full game of Cedar Mountain, the Great Battles of the American Civil War, via Vassal. I did start one and unfortunately was unable to continue it because of all the work stuff. um, let's see if I can share my screen. But I also, um, Bob Wiersma, who was on our board at SPI Games. Well, no, sorry, SPI Games on Facebook, um, lives just a little ways away from me. And last, I think during the fall, we got in at least a one of the games out of the. And he always makes fun of me because I call it press tags. That's just what I called it from the very start. And he won, which rubs more salt in the wound. Uh, and we've played a couple of 2 or 3 times. We've played games of Arnhem, which happens to be one of his favorites, and of course is one of the classics that is as good today as it was. And I got to tell you, I don't necessarily agree with everybody's interpretation on that rule question, but it was a cool rules question on that railroad bridge. Kind of neat. Um, and that's another reason why I enjoy having, the great group and the great camaraderie on the SBI games. And thank gosh uh, for Bruce for pulling that all. And I don't know how many of you realize that he had actually, for ages, had a back when he had Yahoo groups, he just had a group where people could sign on and put SPI questions. And I'd done the website and everything else, and I was really debating whether or not I wanted a Facebook page, because I do think they're a lot of work. And uh, he popped in there and started that and started hitting it. And all I do is do what I always said, just always go in and leave at least one note a day. Prove to people there's something happening. And it has grown ever since to where, there's over 3,000 people now. Wow, great job, and it's due to him, and I'm so glad that he got it started and got it going. So always good. So that's a very interesting question. That if that's what you're asking, are you asking me that question? Yeah. See, that's an interesting point because when I did my conventions, my whole point was to do them as free conventions so that anybody could come in, and I was hoping to teach younger gamers. And by the way, that very first convention had War in Europe on the wall, and they played a scenario from War in the West on that. And we had, my point being, we had a lot of SPI games. My whole point to that convention was I was at the peak of role playing, and I'd said this is going to be a board game and miniatures only convention. We're not going to do role playing, so that people would be exposed to it, and it did work. My point to that is, did it as a free convention. Nobody had to pay, so that you would not have anybody stuck sitting at a counter, sitting, taking, watching for beverages coming in and out and all that. My whole reason was to say, let's make sure that people are able to play. And the one problem that the only problem I had that I experienced with Avalon Con, which I loved, and I ended up being on the board for that, and when I turned over my convention, I'd made it into a nonprofit so people could take it forward, and ended up using a lot of that experience when Avalon Hill went away. We took over Avalon Con and turned it into the World Board Gaming Championships. Did it the same way, where we created a board and built it into a nonprofit. But my one problem that I'd had with DonCon after the 10 years that we did was just that, you know, gamers can be pretty demanding. And I usually had 100 to 130 ASL players. For a lot of years, I had more than 10% of the paying tickets that showed up there. And you'd get the ones that would, I was the one that I'd always had beliefs in how tournaments should run, because like I said, I believe in playing. So I'd traveled all these conventions for years. That's how I started my convention, because they put on tournaments where the scenarios weren't play tested. They put on tournaments where, they were unrealistic. And whether that was ASL or anything else, I played in a lot of Russian campaign tournaments. I played in a lot of others. And I just moved over to those. By the way, I only moved to those because I could not find anybody to play SPI after about 3 years after it was dead. Because people only want to play live games. They don't want to play something that's dead. And I'd go to these conventions, and I'd have the SPI games. What I'd always find with SPI was you could find lots of people who played SPI, and then you'd spend 2 hours. You'd find something, boy, this is going to be great. You'd spend 2 hours. Well, how about Brightonfield? Well, how about Cedar Mountain? Oh, well, now we know what your two favorite games are. Can't play that. You're trying to sucker me here. And you just go back and forth for 2 hours and never get anything, which is why I believed in tournaments, because it was preset. It was there. You knew what you were getting into when you show up. And if the tournaments weren't well done, and I played in a lot of bad tournaments, and I started doing tournaments locally, and I had rules for them, and a lot of mine grew out of playing in USCF chess tournaments. But my point is, after that 10 years, both the 7 years for my convention and then the 10 years with Avalon Con, you do get to a point where it's tough to balance that playing, playing versus service to the hobby. So, yeah, it's a pretty big thing. So, good question, but I also believe we all owe the hobby something. I mean, look what it's given us. I would not be doing these history classes that I teach. I was a math guy. I mean, I could do equations in n space. I mean, 3D. Whatever. It didn't matter to me, and I write programs, but it's the history from SPI. I owe them. I'd never be doing all these history classes and the book I've written and stuff like that. It never happened without them. So another reason why I'm dedicated to a 40-year-old system. Thank you very much. So.
There you go. Okay, so I'm
You won
gonna
at
kind of
Dragon's
open the
Quest
floor.
2. Oh, man.
I'm gonna open the
I tell
floor
you.
to questions
Ah,
for Russ. So anybody
ah,
that has a
very
question,
large
type it in.
lance to play in a tournament. Wow. Oh, man. It is nice to see all of you guys on the board over here. I hope this is working for you. And Alan, I want to thank you for putting this on. This is really, really incredible. And it's a good time. It'd be nice
Indeed,
to.
it
I'm
is.
waiting to hear what you guys all have to say, and I'm wishing there was a way to have that interactive too. But
Oh well,
so
we'll get it next time.
what's next? Yeah. Um, I am going to say that somewhere out there, I wrote articles that said how to how to do tournaments or how to do conventions, and over the years, one of the gratifying things is I will still get letters. Some of my favorites. I mean, the ones that got put on in Canada, the ones that got put on in England, the ones that got put on in Europe. It was fascinating just to see that. And when I did the original CD-ROMs to teach the original Great Battles of the American Civil War, and I did those in 2002, 2003, and I tried to sell them because I was out of a job, and you know, uh, and it was pretty funny because I sold a ton of them, and it was about a 50-50 split, U.S. and Europe. Tons of them to Italy, to Germany, to England. So, there we go. Perception of the future. Games like these really showed themselves to be very close to accurate as played out. That's very interesting, Adam, because I hear a lot of people that will claim that that we had it all wrong, that we had the Warsaw Pact is far more powerful than they were, etc. And I'm always like, I don't know. I'm like you. I think there were a lot of things that they got right. Now, I also feel that uh, the one thing about SPI was any game they had, they remind me a great deal of generally PhD uh, setups where they say they're going to do an evaluation or a test, and they will have a simple 2x2 matrix and they're testing things out. There were so many of the SPI games that they had a point. They had this item that it was about the supply or it was about this weapon. You remember the 75 or the big guns that Germany had developed in World War One that busted all the Belgian forts and stuff like that. Um, they would build games to demonstrate, around those points. And I never felt they were bad. I just felt that they were very enlightening. They would teach you something in the process by stripping away some of the other details. But that other set of details were there. They were good. Um, and I was a big, I didn't do as much World War II. I was very much into all the current history or future games. I mean, Next War and God help me, I tried to like uh, Fifth Corps, Hoff Gap, and all the rest. They're great. They really are great. They are incredible. I just could not master them. I did not have the intelligence to play them well. And it showed me why I don't gamble because uh, I'd run those units until they were ragged on the friction points and then be rolled up in a counterattack. But it was a learning experience, right? And the games were exciting. But I mean, all of their games, all of their future history games were just incredible. And yes, I just read your line there. That's good. Um, Now and see, I still to this day will solitaire uh, Berlin '85 anytime. I mean, I can get that out, and I mean, you can see it happening. And of course, for me at my age, growing up, uh, Berlin was a central focus of so much that it was fascinating to see that game. And that was the beauty about all the future history games, the things that they would show in all their research, those POL uh, hexes where you'd shell them, you'd hopefully sucker the guy in, and then just lay as much artillery as you could on those and light them up, quite literally. So sorry. Anyway, uh, now John, I see you're mentioning Minuteman, and I had never, I have never played Minuteman. There's not many that I've not at least pushed the counters around myself. And I don't ever recall ever playing Minuteman. So it's interesting to hear your thoughts on that. That's ah ah. So oh boy. But so how do all of you find opponents? I guess I'm really curious over here in the comments. Um, you
I'll handle
know,
that.
I mean, I have spent years hanging flyers in uh, game shops, coffee shops, places. Talking it up. My biggest thing when I started writing the articles, a lot of that they were all about that. And of course, when online came, you know, my initial brush with national fame was because I was the guy that wrote all the stuff. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I wanted to add a little bit about that. Um, I came back to wargaming about 8 or 9 years ago after about a 35-year break where I didn't play anything at all. And when I came back, I had, I'd bounced around the country a bit and ended up here in Portland, Oregon. And I had all of my games, neatly packed away, waiting for retirement. Yeah, like that'll happen. And so I got them out and, immediately wanted to try and find some opponents. And although Portland is a very good game city, it's not a very good wargaming city. Most of the people here like Euros and parlor games and things like that. And I was lucky enough to have discovered Vassal shortly after I started trying to get back into the hobby and learning how technology had changed things in the time I was away. And so I immediately gravitated into Vassal, and ever since then I've played more people out of the country than I have in it. Um, I've had opponents in Canada, France. I have one now who's a Spanish guy, but he's actually living and working in Israel, all that. So it truly is an international thing for me. And also, playing people across the country in different time zones. But it's like I don't have a regular opponent even in the Pacific time zone. It's that rare that I play face to face. So for me, if it hadn't been for Vassal, I wouldn't even hack into the hobby very far. But now that I've gotten into Vassal, learned a lot about creating the modules, and um, that has kind of dovetailed into the start of development projects and things like that that I'm scratching the surface of. But really, Vassal is the key element. If it weren't for Vassal, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here chatting with any of you about this. I'd have gone back to playing golf or something else.
Are you saying back to me? Over to you, Russ. Well, thank you, Alan. And I'm curious. I'm curious what your points were for some of that, because that's you are living in a hot spot as far as, just from what I see on my SPI opponent finder. I mean, there's a ton of people out there with a lot of different interests, and so I'm curious what you did that got all that. Now, do people below the age of 50 care about SPI? Only if they were lucky enough to have their parents show them the games, I think is probably about it. Um, that because how do people find old games? How do they, and as I said, even within a couple of years of SPI being gone, um, they faded pretty quickly, because of course at that point you had so many games coming in, and we're back to that again now. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think there's a wealth of games being produced out there today. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Um, you know, I don't know. Some people will say that SPI's maps are rudimentary for the early part. Um, and in today's world where everything is multicolor and polished and everything else. And yes, Alan, the maps for the new version of Great Battles of the American Civil War are incredible. That's actually what got me to buy it way back when um, it first came out. But um, the reality is, I don't know that people under 50. Um, I have a number though that I play with because they got hooked, and this is the one thing that I'll say is enthusiasm sells. They got hooked because one of the ways I found a lot of gamers, back in the early '80s, I would be working at a store, um, on the weekend or something like that, and it'd be a retail outlet. I'd put one of the games up on the counter, off to the side. And if you found anybody that knew what the heck that was, you had found an opponent because, and I got to tell you, there's at least 4 people that I game with that I never would have known and never would have known they played SPI except they saw those. Or one of them was actually an Avalon Hill person, but it came over. Now, my point to that was when I had my own bookstore for a while, I had War in Europe up on the wall. And when somebody gets arrested looking at that, where they just stop and go, it's like this is a potential. And you all saw that I'd played the original, well, actually second edition, Terrible Swift Sword, a few months ago for the Battle for Little Round Top, and it was that guy. Yes, way back in the '80s, I started a science fiction bookstore that turned into a comic shop. And my problem was I wanted to have a science fiction bookstore, and I loved comics, but the '80s comics were not my comics. Um, and this is rather interesting because there's somebody I've been talking about comics with recently. What I didn't tell him was one of my problems was, the majority of my customers were, probably 20 and younger, and a heck of a lot of them were a lot younger. And this comic called Watchmen came out from DC, and I kept waiting to get busted because these 12, 13, and 14-year-old boys were buying this, and sooner or later a parent was going to bother to read it. And yeah, but anyway, so had a great time with that for 4 years, but then my regular career, because I did that on the side, my regular career took off. I have probably played almost all of the non-SPI Great Battles of the American Civil War. It is incredible. It does prove I'm a stick in the mud. It does some great things, and I'm very happy to have played them. But I can't work up the same level of enthusiasm. It's gotten a lot better. This is a personal opinion. these last 2 or 3 where they have really, really busted their butts on fixing the rules and really making those rules tight again, has won my admiration. Um, and I am all for that. And between um, one of the people I knew that originally found me through the website, and then went on to work on the more modern stuff, and then all of the work that Alan and everybody that he's associated with, and Bill Byrne and all the rest of them have done, have made that just incredible. So, and yes, I prefer the original, and you got to be careful on the original. The original after the 1977 errata, for TSS. Once they finally were smoothing it out, and of course, I love what Eric Lee Smith did with Great Battles, where he really put it all down there and pulled it together. Now, 77 was still first edition. Second edition is when TSR got their hooks into it and made it ugly, but at least the rules were still tight. Now, I see a question here about what are the most popular areas on the website. I got to tell you, um, the most popular area on the website is every month the downloads from the extras area is off the chart. And the irony is, and this is so sick, I have gone back. It used to be I kept track of all this just for the heck of it, because I'd be sitting in airports, and you just have that time where you didn't want to get too deep into anything. Honest to God, the number one downloads constantly is anything to do with Campaign for North Africa. I am not kidding. I swear to God, if there were if I bothered to take it over and put it into one of my typical sequel pieces where I'm making things graphical, I swear to God there'd be a line going up that would just be turning red as the speed kept pumping out there. Those anything to do with Campaign for North Africa would be the number one. Um, Really, number two is usually next. Uh, thank you. The Usually the next one is Next War. Um, and you have to realize, I mean, there are hundreds. I mean, I've got, and I'm generally always, it's fits and starts, but I'm always adding something new. But obviously, there are people out there that are doing searches, and they will just find this, and my God, they just. And then, of course, the other thing I used to do that I haven't done in a while, it's fascinating to see all the websites that have put mine up as a link. And so often I love it because you'll go just to see, because it's like, wow, there's a lot of activity coming from there. They're not in English. I mean, there's the French ones, there's the German ones, and there's the Russian ones that, I mean, and thank God for Google now, because I'll often grab pieces and translate it and stuff like that. Now, of course, there's far more. If I look at it, I mean, the vast majority of the users are from the US. But, that majority is about 75%. So I used to have a lot of conversations with I'm not sure conversation's the right word, with Richard Berg. And the irony is, of course, uh, I'd actually worked as at one point in the early 80s. I think it was while he was on what I would have considered version 2 or version 3 of Great Battles. He decided he was going to change Gleam of Bayonets over to the chit pull, not the chit pull we know today, the kind of slightly failed chit pull that he started with. Um, and he decided he was going to go over to that, and I did some play testing on that. I did some rules commentating, and that was always a big thing with me. And if any of you know me, um, I generally will take apart rules and demand certain things, or I want them clean as possible, and there is no such thing. But he, we did a lot of that through, and then and the problem was he would be working on so many things that he just suddenly dropped. I mean, he just, I don't know, I have no idea whatever happened to that. I still had the rewritten rules of what they were trying to do with Gleam. Um, and I suspect it dropped after he did the two, um, the First Blood and the other ones that came in there. That I get the feeling, he did not sell enough to justify not just getting a flat payout from uh, other game companies to develop yet another game. And I always found it interesting with him was, and I was shocked, on the boards when this came, because he was always I don't want to say egotistical because it sounds wrong, but anybody that knew him, I mean, he's a very intelligent man. Uh, but especially if you got to know him in person, just a really a decent person. Um, and it is ironic that when I finally met him, um, we were out in Denver. I think we were all snowed in at that convention. But anyway, uh, it he was just really a decent person, and the guy, I don't know what happened by the time 2000 came around. The reason I say it's ironic was one of his last articles for SPI before he basically told them that they didn't pay him enough, which was true for anybody. But I mean, this guy was a professional. Um, the the thing that he will put out there was anybody can develop a game. Truth is, anybody can develop a game. He wrote an entire item on it, and you got to remember, this is like 78, 79, 80, somewhere in there. Uh, he's saying anybody can pick a battle, do enough research, develop a game. They can then do the spitballing necessary to make it a good game, a playable game. He said what they can't do is they can't write rules. And he said the rule book are, it's the killer for all these things. You can't have a professional product unless you have a good rule book. Now, fast forward to whatever year, and Alan can help me out here, that the first 3 days of Gettysburg, the new version of the chit pull Great Battles, the American Civil War, came out. Alan, what year was that? Yep, okay. I was going to say it was late 1990s. I bought that, and I tried to read the rule book. And I tried to read the rule book up through the third edition. Yes, I bought all of them. Um, damn mad about it, to be honest. I was so damn frustrated, um, because that was not the Rich Berg of the old days. He was, he was a writer. Any lawyer spends their time writing, and they write precisely. He'd either thrown off that concept or just realized that, um, very much like what happened with ASL. We used to have the joke you could stencil ASL on the side of a dead cat and sell it. Uh, the reality was you could say this is a Rich Berg game, or you could say it was a Great Battles of the American Civil War game, and it was going to sell. I was so damn mad, and I sat down to write him, and and that's about the time then, because what really happened was I developed those discs to teach the original Great Battles of the American Civil War because I was going to try. I was going to try to then, because this was about the time the third edition came out, I was going to try to teach people how to do the third edition, 3 Days of Gettysburg. And I'm trying to ask him questions. I'm trying to put his, I'm putting, his, I'm like, you got to tell me, you got to explain this to, and he's like, I don't have to do anything. And and he and I'd get along. He would blast me. We would talk, and then I would say, wait a minute, this is me. This is the guy that did this or did that or whatever. And I got to tell you, when I did that disc for the original Great Battles of the American Civil War, and 100 of them went out the door immediately. I mean, they just poof, just gone. And and there were people who got very excited because at that point nobody had done any kind of video teaching of a game, and they interviewed Berg and said, "Isn't this incredible? Isn't this great?" This was on Consim, and isn't this incredible? And he goes, "Well, yeah, for a 30-year-old game, I guess. I mean, if you needed help to learn how to play a 30-year-old game, I guess this is what you need." I mean, it was one of those damned with faint praise, but I was happy to have done it because it taught me a lot about how to do, video uh, teaching video games, and those are available, for free. I sold them for about a year because at the time I was unemployed and I had to justify to myself I'd said uh, I was going to do 40 hours. I was going to give it 40 hours, and it took me 100. So if you think about it, at $30 a piece, I think I made 250 an hour. But and that would be $2.50 an hour. But on the other hand, I've met some wonderful people who bought them, liked them, enjoyed them, talked to me about them. And then, of course, I went on and did the ASL ones, and I still, to this day, have people writing asking me to please do more of them. So, but I sat down with Alan, actually, folks, what, 5 years ago, you and I discussed this, where I ask you to show me, because there are still holes, as far as I'm concerned, there's still, right off the start, there's one huge hole in that rule book that just frustrates the hell out of me. Um, and I asked you to take me through it because I really wanted to go ahead and do the chit pull, and I just like it's like, And then it was nice because I met Greg and everything, and he actually asked me to look over the rules when they were getting ready to do Twin Peaks. And I did, and I, he was plugging a lot of holes that you guys, and not necessarily he, but you and Dick and everybody else. I mean, you guys were plugging a lot of holes, so it was really, really good. So, yes, sir.
Yeah. Um, I've got a lot of experience with the GMT Great Battles series, and even though I'm really comfortable with it, every time I have a discussion with Bill Byrne, I just learn how many fine points of it I don't really have down pat. Um, but I also do a fair bit of teaching of it, and I've played so much of it that I'm familiar enough with it to where I have deluded myself into thinking I can show somebody how to play this in about an hour. It's really not that difficult. And the way the game system comes out on the table is you struggle with it at first, kind of like Air War, another SPI title. You struggle with it at first, but once you get the rudiments down, you find it goes much, much faster because you understand why you're doing certain things. But when you go to explain somebody how all the systems work, you you find yourself going around in these circles where you'll get halfway into explaining one concept, like, say, how efficiency works, which is the underpinning of the chit pull system, and how you have to trace all your chain of command at the start of a turn and determine how many activations each of your divisions or corps are going to get that turn. And once you get into that, then you run into a couple of exceptions that you think you need to explain, but you know you're just going to confuse somebody. So you go, well, hold on to that thought. We'll get to that. And then you go to another subject and you're halfway through that and you're like, but then there are these exceptions. And after a while, 1 hour turns into three, and you still haven't gotten through everything. And then the kicker is that you save the most confusing for last, which is shock combat, and it it always takes so much longer than you think it's going to take to explain. But again, once you surmount that curve and you play 3 full turns from start to finish, and all of the concepts start to make sense, then it's pretty easy, except for the fact that you do have to constantly keep returning to the rule book to make sure that you're not messing it up and you're getting everything right. And that's kind of the price you pay for a system that is very detailed. And that system is very detailed. So that's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Again, I can't wait to hear that whole story. But David Larson, thanks for the heads up. And I know I do tend to go on. Generally, just so you know, my lectures are 2.5 hours long. I do let people have a break normally, but you guys can get up and go and leave if you want. But that's what happens when you get old and lots of strange stories. But um, hmm. I'm curious, T.C. Bradley, that's your exact experience with the. So I would ask you to give me that. Ooh, best and worst from SPI. Obviously, I am biased, so you know, somewhere between Terrible Swift Sword and Great Battles, the American Civil War, uh, probably Pea Ridge, maybe Corinth. Somewhere in there. I mean, those are still stunning games today. I mean, and think about it. We're back Corinth. That's a Berg, and it's Berg saying, "I'm not going to use your command system, Eric," which is kind of you know really what Eric had done was develop it out of what Berg had given the Confederates in the original Terrible Sword. But still incredible game, just absolutely incredible. And you think about it, there are just so many incredible uh, uh, SPI games, and I guess you know I felt that um, some of the later SF games seemed a little thin to me. They were not quite there, and but by the same token, I love Star Soldier. I can't help it. I love that game, but in reality, it's like we're missing something here. You don't really get the feel of the powered armor of everything, but it does do some good things. Of course, I'm trying to. Oh, there you go, Dallas. You got it. Boom, boom. Done on that one. Yeah. Although I've had people tell me that like Dallas and said that was an incredibly well done game for a show. Since I'd never watched Dallas, I had absolutely no desire to. It's just that in what world did somebody think that was going to sell? I don't know. But you see, and that's where you kind of um, stumble over. Part of mine is the one thing, these guys were great game designers, and they were great theorists in business, but they took the theory too far, um, and made it dogmatic. Um, you know, so scrimmage. I will actually say that I've played at least 3 downs of scrimmage. Tito gets a bum rap. Tito is actually a pretty good game. I will say I've never played it against anybody though, but it's pretty solid. Um, okay, Kevin, I'm going to turn this around to you. How much playtesting do you think people get on their games today? On these, let's leave. I know how much playtesting the new Great Battles of the American Civil War gets, and it's a lot. But I guess I'm just curious, how much playtesting you feel a lot of the other games get. Um, and Edwin, that's specifically the thing I like. They were not afraid to think outside the box, and really Dallas is an example of that. So I shouldn't knock it. Um, but you know, it, the problem was sometimes, if you think about scrimmage, they put it out there because they really developed it as a test to figure out physical movement and how they could do some of those things for whether it's patrol, whether it's other games, the next level of that. And so you ended up buying something that really wasn't a game. And that's the one aspect that could hurt them. They were putting out so much stuff. I guess I've never really felt that their stuff was any more poorly play tested than anybody else at that time. Um, so I will not say scrimmage fathered patrol. He did claim though that the reason he developed scrimmage was to better understand individual units, the individuals, people, the movement of people as a group and how that interacted with others, and that's what he does say. So and that you know just makes patrol look that much better. Uh, yes, sir.
I have a small story. I have a dear departed friend that I met in high school, and he was one of the people that helped to introduce me to SPI games, and we started with Patrol. And one of the worst experiences I ever had in that game was the scenario where, now keep in mind, I could never beat him in anything, so I would just try anything just to get a W against him. And so we played a scenario, and I brought an entire squad of guys on a tank and rolled them onto the map, and we're just cruising across country, and one of his guys coolly landed a rifle grenade right on the deck of the tank and took out just about everybody on top of it with just one rifle grenade. And it was just one more example of how I could never beat this guy. So yeah, Patrol has special memories for me, and especially because um, the date that is on that game, 22nd of January, is also the birthday of that dear departed friend of mine. So I could always tell his birthday by looking at my old patrol box.
I'm gonna wish I knew what you said there. Uh, just so because I suspect that would be a fun back and forth just from the way you were going there. Um, I'm yeah, I'll get it later. Oh, I'll get it. Um, it I think that whole point though, if you look at how much SPI influenced everything that happened from the time they started publishing. If you really look at it, here's Avalon Hill, and they publish tactics, they publish this, they publish that, and they're all the same. They keep things very similar up until Dunnigan pops up and gives them a couple of games. And then, of course, you could argue that Dunnigan, changed the world of wargaming with, the incredible sales for uh, Panzer Blitz. I mean, that's just awesome sales, and um, but it's Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson, because again, you know, look at those counters. They're iconic. We still see them today in our games. Um, it just it's amazing what they did, and then from that point on, I mean, they're the ripple that is still being felt today. And somebody had asked about games. One that I don't think gets enough credit. Look at Raid by Mark Kerman, I think, and look where he's gone after that. And of course he did October War. And here's the problem: when I start free associating like this with facts and names and dates, I end up in real trouble. So could be stuff that I don't get there, but so many games. And my point being that because of the process that Dunnigan created uh, to make all this happen, to create designers and developers out of just everyday people, you look at it and think, wow, here they created everything that's come after them. And in a lot of ways, what we don't get, we talk about the P500 system today. If you really go and look at it, the death of SPI was actually, they've been making these monsters and they were selling them in advance. They were getting paid through a lot of months on advance sales. And the problem was they made the decision that they had to go to these 495 games, these 295 games, because they were getting, micro gaming and Steve Jackson games eventually, were just banging it. And the problem was, what they didn't take into account is by doing that, they still had great sales for those little games, but great sales of a 295 game versus great sales of a 29.95 game is a whole different level. And I will guarantee they did not have 10 times the sales, to have made up that money. And that's what killed them. Yes, absolutely right, David Isby. And that is a great game. And again, Joe Belaski, if it weren't for him, I won't say it. I'll let the guy that's always baiting DG, say it. But I mean, if it weren't for Joe Belaski, wow. So the yes, and of course for the history, and then I look at it, not just history. Al Nafi. I mean, I have to tell you, the one thing I love about the SPI games on Facebook is we get to hear from those guys occasionally. I wish to God that Redmond Simonson were still around. Back in the 80s, early 90s, when I'd made some big things happen with Genie. He was not on Genie, but some other people passed along the conversations we were having. And he did an entire long piece that came back to discuss that, because he loved hearing from people like us. He loved that interchange with gamers. And then, as you mentioned with Al Nafi, I wish to heck we could convince him. He drops in every once in a while to say something, as does some of the others, but I would just, one of the things I have not been able to do with spigames.net is you've all noticed, if you look at it, I've kind of written chapters of the growth of SPI, and I've never wanted to write the ending because there you're getting into some other stuff. But the reality of I've wanted to get these guys to basically do oral histories that I could use, and I've never got them to answer me. I don't know exactly why. I don't know if they don't want to talk about it, or they're afraid they'll say something that'll annoy all of us. But now I will tell you, last year where I thought we were going to end up with all those guys at the one con back east, and then it just fell apart. And about 10, 12 years ago, I was invited to one in Baltimore where they had a lot of them show up. And unfortunately, with the job I had, I didn't have enough notice. I mean, it took an act of God to try and get out of the pre-schedule that I had, and I could not go to that. And I've cursed to this day that I couldn't, because essentially I suspect that's the last one where you were going to have a vast majority of these, because that one fell apart last year. It's just a little ways into Pennsylvania, and Dunnigan decided he wasn't healthy enough to get there and stuff. And, you just kind of go, we've been blessed to have these guys for so long, and of all of them, Redmond should still be around, and the fact that he's not is very painful. But I mean, these guys are incredible. When it first become public that SPI, the problem was it never really did become public. It was about a year and a half before, and if you read between the lines, you could see it. But and you could see it in other ways, just in the way things were going. And really, it was within the last few months when they basically turned back around and brought the guy that originally had started S&T back in, because he'd gone on to be a business consultant for big businesses, and they brought him in. And at the same time, they'd moved Dunnigan out. Part of that was because, as I said, Dunnigan seemed to be dogmatic about, hey, if we do 5,000, it costs us this much a unit, but if we do 10,000, it costs us less than half that same amount. Well, that's all fine, but if you're only selling 6,000 or 7,000 of them, that's not, you're losing all that money anyway. And worse yet, if you're not selling 5,000, which they weren't. I mean, what we don't realize is that the print runs on a lot of these are absurdly short. The fact that so many of us are out there and remember them, with the exception of the ones that show up in S&T, there are very few that get into 5 digits, as far as I can tell. And I've never been able to get real numbers. Dunnigan would share real numbers every once in a while. But I mean, let's face it, for a lot of years, Star Force was their number one seller. And yeah, Star Force for years before War of the Ring. And that's another reason why they finally went up into so much SF that Simonson had finally convinced them. But for years, and I don't even think it was 20,000 copies. And that was like, it had taken 4 or 5 years to get that many sold. And I believe that in the one article that I recall, it was an earlier article, that essentially most of the stuff was printed around 5,000 copies. That was the initial run. They estimated, they had a good idea as to how many copies a game would sell in its first year. And the ones that they considered the dogs were the ones that did not make that, because not only did they have the excess that they would have had, but they had far more of an excess because it wasn't there. And for a lot of years, that number was like two grand, 2,000 copies. So it's amazing. But and I see we're going to have to wrap it up now. So I just want to thank all of you for putting up with my technical difficulties on this end. I hope to heck it came out well enough that you could hear it and it worked. I suspect we've put everybody to sleep. I don't know how many people are still out there, but I just want to tell you, A, thank you very much. Thank you, Alan, for making all this happen. B, if I've claimed that I've done something incredible, please discount that greatly because nobody alone does anything incredible. I may be a spark plug. I may be a person that makes some of it happen. I like to think that I see things that other people might not, or I carry on longer. But it's all of you. I mean, I can do anything I want with SPIgames.net. I can do anything I want with SPI Games on Facebook, but without you guys, it's nothing. So there's nothing that I've done that's that incredible. And just the fact that you're willing to waste an hour and a half of your night listening to me blather about nothing, I mean, is pretty incredible too. So thank you all.
All right. Well, no, it was great. I had a really good time, and I think, judging from all the comments and the questions, everybody else did too. So we'll definitely have to set up a date to have you back again when we get all the technical difficulties ironed out, and we'll have a round two. But I just wanted to say thank you again for coming on with us and sharing some of your history and insight. And thanks to everybody else for the questions and the commentary. And well, we'll see you all next time on Stiglr for the Details. So long, everyone.